that you all submitted in August. And so the folks who received this invitation were all folks who actually submitted a survey. So you either submitted your regional action plan or you submitted the institutional supplement survey back at the end of August. So what we're going to do is share the results of these two surveys. And for the regional action plan, we're going to talk a little bit about some of what was accomplished in the last year, looking back to 2018, 2019, and then plans looking ahead for the 19-20 year. For the institutional supplement surveys, we'll be talking about some of the levels of awareness and engagement for different stakeholder groups, and also take a look at progress towards the institutional target. And there'll be some additional data, insights to share throughout, new analyses that we've done that I think complement some of the questions or comments that came in from the surveys. So that's what we'll jump into next. So first I'm going to talk about the regional target action plan themes. And actually, I guess I should also say a big thank you to everyone. We had really good participation in the surveys. We were aiming for 100% and very, very, very close to that, just a small number outstanding. And so we appreciate that everyone was able to do those and do those in a timely manner by the end of the fiscal year. And it gave us good insights into what's happening across the state related to 60x30TX. So for each of these highlights kind of from the 18-19, I'm going to take these kind of one by one through the three regional target areas. So what happened last year? The first one here is looking at broadening the 60x30 educated population awareness. So a lot of the efforts that were focused on this target were focused on kind of dissemination and awareness and communication activities. So some of the highlights here, in Southeast, created a video to promote 60x30 in their region. West Texas launched a website that was done collaboratively with all 5 of the institutions in that region to provide information about attending college in the region. In Upper Rio Grande and South Texas, they each launched significant efforts to support returning students by engaging employers or working with their workforce solutions partners. And Central Texas conducted what I called an institutional roadshow. They went to most of the institutions in the large region of Central Texas to talk about the regional targets and the regional activities going on. Moving now to the completion strategy, almost every region in some way highlighted their work on guided pathways. We heard a lot about guided pathways, particularly in the 2-year space, but also in the 4-year space as well, and thinking about how to connect that work across institutions more. We also heard a lot about transfer. So most regions talked about transfer, and I'll dig into that a little bit more in the coming slides. Several regions mentioned either working with and through or planning to work with and through the North Texas Community College Consortium. So of course, they're housed in the Metroplex, so not surprising that they offered some convenings and trainings over the last year. But also Southeast is working on loading their guided pathways into the Pathways portal for NTCCC, and High Plains is making plans to do the same. In the third area, there is the high school to higher education strategies. And some of the highlights from the last year that I pulled out here, or that the team pulled out, is in Northwest. They really highlighted their work with their workforce solutions partner. They got a grant to support career specialists in the high schools to expand their capacity to provide direct outreach on college and career options. Upper Rio Grande and several others talked about dual credit. Upper Rio Grande talked in particular about dual credit training, both in classrooms for instructors and for advisors. And then in South Texas, different parts of South Texas, we're talking about kind of affordability and ensuring that students had the finances that they needed to participate in college. So in the lower RTB, we saw a big focus on financial aid application completion, and then the San Antonio area, a focus on developing a promise program to offer the first 2 years of college for free. there was a lot here. We did a content analysis looking at the answers to the questions, kind of what activities and strategies do you have planned. And you'll see that there was a lot of overlap across the 3 target areas, and these were some of the themes that rose to the top. You'll notice we didn't break these out by the educated population completion and high school to higher education strategies because they're really blended across all 3. So we'll talk about these kind of as kind of broad regional activities across the target areas here. So the big one that we saw a lot of was strategic communications. We had a number of regions talking about ongoing opportunities to let folks know about the 60 by 30 regional targets and strategies. In particular, folks were focusing on service centers, chambers of commerce, leadership, economic development executives. Another mentioned various presentations, again, to their regional service centers, some even focusing specifically on counselors within their regional service centers. They wanted to continue to use their consortium, especially to raise awareness around the high school to higher ed goals. They felt like the regional target work was a good basis for deeper engagement on the high school to higher ed, and particularly the flattening that we've seen in terms of progress on that particular target. There was additional interest in articulating the advisory groups and how often they would be getting together. So one region talked about we're going to have 5 meetings. Another said that we're going to formalize kind of the pattern of their advisory group meetings and timeliness of those. Others really focused on kind of the outward push towards websites, posters, videos, and the dissemination thereof. So a variety of things under that first theme of strategic communication. Another theme that emerged was related to partnerships. Lots of regions were talking about either starting or enhancing collaboration with their workforce solutions or their workforce board partners. This is something we heard this summer at the advisory group forum too, that was kind of an underutilized opportunity in some regions. Several regions were also talking about directly working with employers. So one said we're going to identify 3 employers we want to work with, another a large employer, other business partners, and a lot of these were around trying to identify and support adult students or returning students. And so another kind of avenue for that was wanting to develop more internships and experiential learning opportunities. So some of the reasons for deepening those workforce and industry partnerships. Other kinds of partnerships folks mentioned, one region is talking about joining the Grad Tech Consortium, working with the coordinating board. Another, High Plains was talking about merging P16 councils, that they have 2 separate P16 councils that are working in their larger High Plains region and wanting to bring some coordination and connection across those. The next big one we saw in terms of themes was transfer. Lots and lots of discussion about transfer. Some trying to formalize agreements for transfer, bridging transfer programs that would be more of a regional level, signing a regional MOU for committing to various transfer guides, joining a transfer consortium, and then lots of folks were talking about, I think maybe 6 or 7 talked about reverse transfer or auto awarding and wanting to automate some of the processes around reverse transfer completion. Okay, moving on to advising. There were a number of regions that talked about the importance of advising. Mostly it was kind of increasing the number of advising or offering training or support to advisors. Some specifically were interested in peer mentors, and others focused on special populations like veterans or specifically focusing on adult or returning students. One region, West Texas, is going to be partnering with the coordinating board on the ADV program, which is a chatbot that the coordinating board has developed in partnership with UT Austin to help provide a technology platform to answer a lot of the questions that potentially enrolling students may have. So that is a way that they can kind of extend some of their person-to-person advising with some technology supports. Under transition supports, the things folks were most likely to talk about were wanting to kind of make good on the HB3 FAFSA requirements, so thinking about additional FAFSA and Applied Texas workshops across the region, and making sure that ISDs could help students meet the new high school graduation requirements. Other things, summer bridge programs, upward bound programs, and college prep courses were among some of the other activities mentioned for transition services. Use of data, a couple of folks were talking about use of data, and this largely also concentrated on stop-outs or adult students, so trying to identify who the stop-outs are, where are they, how much credit might they have, to design strategies around that. Program maps, this goes really nicely with both guided pathways and with transfer. Several reasons for talking about implementation of guided pathways and articulating that through their program maps. Targeted funding, a couple of regions talked about wanting to leverage funding opportunities. Several were through their either TWC through the Education Specialist grants or through local workforce development boards that might have funding available for students who are returning for workforce retraining that might be happening in a college environment. Others were looking at joint applications to go seek external funding to support stop-outs. P16 councils and institutions individually were also some of the entities looking for outside funding. Finally, the last couple here, dual credit actually is the last one here. So a couple of regions are continuing to focus. There's already a lot of activity in this area, but wanting to be more strategic about the dual credit offerings and thinking about this as a key strategy for their high school to higher ed targets, and to just grow the number and supports around dual credit. So here you can see the crosswalk of the themes by the regional target areas, and as I said, most of the themes kind of crossed target area, although you'll see a few extra under completion here. One thing, I'm getting a lot of static and feedback. Just taking a look over at the chat box here. So we aren't hearing anything on this side. If folks would just be careful to mute your own line, and we are trying to keep the line clean on this side. So let us know if you continue to have issues. Okay. One area where we have been leveraging administrative funds here at the coordinating board. This is something we mentioned to everyone this summer, that we were going to offer 2 high school to higher education grants, and wanted to give you an update on that because that's going to inform work in 2 of the regions in the upcoming year. So we did make those 2 awards in August, and High Plains and Upper Rio Grande were the recipients of those. I believe we had 6 applications for this. So this work is what we're trying to encourage and work with these 2 regions on is developing a viable theory of change with regard to their high school to higher education enrollment. So this is a short grant with just 1 year, and while we have kind of big aims in terms of increasing the target in this area, that may certainly not be done in 1 year, but what are some of the partnerships and tools that might support that work and pay off kind of down the line as we approach 2030. So we are asking them to identify a leading indicator, kind of pre direct high school to college enrollment, and to develop at least 1 tool or resource. So I just wanted to provide a bit more detail on what's going on in these 2 regions related to these grants. So for High Plains, the lead institution is Amarillo College, and they did a nice job of pulling together the 5 institutions of higher education in that area, 2 education service centers, and 1 workforce development board. And they actually put in their grant proposal that they wanted to increase their direct high school to higher education enrollment by 5% and set that target out there. And they're focusing on emphasizing kind of the why, the what, and the how to support high school to higher education matriculation. And in terms of the why, one area that they're focused on is just being clearer about the jobs and working with their workforce development board to identify the hot jobs that would really motivate students about why college is necessary and how it can support their professional goals. They're also working on formalizing their pathways information and posting all of that to the North Texas Community College Consortium, and then organizing a variety of regional recruitment events that will focus on those hot jobs and the program pathways that would support students. For the Upper Rio Grande, the grant lead is UTEP, University of Texas at El Paso, and their group included 2 institutions of higher education. They pulled together 8 ISDs and along with their workforce development board. So for them, they're really focusing on a couple of areas. A big one is around developing a financial planning tool. And the idea is to be able to provide more clearly an estimate to students about how much financial aid is really possible for them in the local context. So if you have an adjusted gross income of 0, then you're likely to get over $8,000 in grants, for example, and they want that to be pretty customized to the institutions in the region. So offering estimated costs, estimated aids, and options to address unmet needs. They've also done a lot of work to do these Operation College Bound, which provides on-site enrollment service activities in high schools, and so they go, it's kind of a one-stop shop. They can get transcripts, they can enroll, they can work on financial aid applications, and those happen, I think they said 40 high schools in 30 days that they kind of blitz the area with these Operation College Bound, and so they'll be providing additional support for that, and then outlining a regional MOU to help identify the support that UTEP and EPCC can provide related to college readiness in high school. And they're really focusing on the college prep course as an opportunity before high school is over to help students become college ready. So we've done kind of an initial touch base with them, and that work will continue over the course of this year, and we're excited to see where that work goes. So switching gears here a little bit, one of the next questions in the regional action plan is we asked each region to take a look at their data for the last 3 years. So for your educated population, for your completion, and for your high school to higher ed targets. Are they going up? Are they going down? And, we can see that in the data, but what we're really asking is, what's some of the contextual information that's happening on the ground to help us understand why the numbers are going up or going down, and what are some of the explanations? So for the educated population, in many regions, the trends were going up, and in those places, folks identified guided pathways, dual credit code requisite models, and net in-migration as kind of key factors. So there are a variety of things that they see as happening in the college space that is helping to improve outcomes for students, but also several regions, I think Central Texas and Metroplex perhaps, or maybe even the San Antonio area, I want to say we're recognizing that a lot of their in-migration was among folks with high levels of education, and even expressed some concern that while it's going up, they may not be serving the folks who are from those areas as well, and needing to kind of stay focused on that local population. In places where there were downward trends, and you'll kind of see this in each of the areas, low unemployment was probably the most common thing that folks talked about. They also talked about in terms of populations that had historically higher levels of attainment, either flattening out or decreasing, while other sectors of the population were increasing with lower levels of attainment. They also talked in several regions about net out-migration, especially the more rural regions were focused on this as a concern, and increased recruitment out of state, either directly out of high school or after students are credentialed in higher education. Regarding completion, there were a couple of votes for growing cross-sector collaboration, which I thought was a really great observation, that folks were thinking kind of across K-12 higher education and workforce more explicitly. They feel like that's a reflection of what's going on in their region. They also observed that graduation rates have been increasing, and again, co-requisite model and advising were among the things that folks thought would explain increases that they've seen. There were a couple of regions that saw a downward trend or just in general kind of foreshadowing some concern, and again, low unemployment and demographics were the most commonly cited items here. For high school to higher education, there were very few actually explanations of upward trends because there really weren't upward trends in this period of time. There was a sub-region that identified things that they thought would be supportive of upward trends and talked specifically about support for summer melt and students who are selected for financial aid verification and regional partnerships that can intervene earlier in the process as kind of potential opportunities. And then downward trends, a couple of regions identified kind of capacity for counselors to be able to take on kind of college readiness, college preparation. Again, low unemployment and students going directly into the workforce. And so these were some of the things that folks, just kind of a general impression. And so I wanted to share one kind of as an example of this that we saw, and then also provide a little bit of data to give you some insight into what I think we're seeing in the statewide numbers, especially for the high school to higher ed. So with the Southeast, they provided data about some of the population trends, and so looking at declines in 2/3 of their region, and then some data on population shifts among their white population, their Hispanic population. And the reason I'm calling this one out is I think in some of these, there was kind of a tenor of demographics are changing, what are we going to do about it, or had a tone that it was a little bit challenging. And I think what was nice about this particular one is really emphasizing to say the institutions and the systems have not sufficiently supported the young Hispanic population, and we need to do more. And so I thought that that was a good way of kind of talking about both some of the challenges and where the responsibility lies in terms of providing better support for populations that are growing, and knowing that the historical patterns and the historical supports that have been provided may not be sufficient for our changing demographics, and that is incumbent upon us as higher education professionals and education professionals to provide. So some related data insights, especially because of the workforce information, I wanted to dig in a little bit to some information that my colleagues Elizabeth Shivers and Chelsea Moore have helped pull together on the statewide level, and foreshadow for you something that we're going to do on a regional basis as kind of a next step. But just to start, you can see some of these demographic trends that Hispanic students now make up 50% of all Texas public high school graduates, and you can see that that has been increasing over the last 2 years, an increase of about 24,000 Hispanic graduates. At the same time, African-American graduates have remained flat as a percentage of all the high school graduates. White students have declined from 33% to 31%, and Asian and other students are increasing slightly from 6% to 7%. And we see that there are implications of this shift when we look at the direct to high school to higher education enrollment by these race and ethnic groups. So African-American and Hispanic, 47% and 49%, while the white population matriculates to higher education at 53%, and Asian and other at 69%. Size of those populations at the bottom there. So even though Asian, the percentage is quite high, it's a smaller number of our high school grad population. And economic disadvantage is also kind of a key factor in this. So you see for every race and ethnic group that those who are economically disadvantaged participate in higher education or enroll directly in higher education at lower rates. There's a particularly large gap in the white population in terms of those who are economically disadvantaged and not. And when we look at these numbers, if you look at the bottom at the number of students, another kind of key observation here is that you'll see that the majority of African American and Hispanic students are economically disadvantaged, while the majority of our white students are not economically disadvantaged. So kind of these two factors are combining, and important to keep in mind as we think about designing supports and sort of the scale of supports needed for our entire Texas population. I also wanted to share a little bit of information about sort of the insights around the workforce outcomes for students. And so if they're not coming into higher education, what are our high school grads doing? And so if we look at the 2018 graduates, as we've talked about, 52% statewide we find them enrolled in higher education. About a quarter are not found enrolled, but they're employed. So we find them in our unemployment insurance wage records. And then the remaining 23%, we don't find them in higher education, and we don't find them employed. So there could be military students might show up here, students who attend career institutions, or those who are just neither in the workforce. Out of state could also be in here. So that's a lumpy 23%, but those are the ones we don't find. So overall, 48% of our high school graduates are not found in our public and independent institutions of higher education. So now just looking at the ones that we do find employed, so if students choose the alternative to higher education and go directly to work, what we find is that really they're predominantly in low-wage jobs. So unemployment is low, yes, but where we find these just high school grads working so you can see here the median wage is about $14,000 for the most recent cohort. About 25% of them are employed, and it's about 78,000, 79,000 of those students are employed. Over time, the median wages have increased, but pretty small increase, and the number employed has gone up about just under 10,000. And we often hear stories about students who are directly leaving high school have the opportunity for high-wage jobs, but when we look in the aggregate, it's really the exception, not the norm, that students with a high school diploma are in high-wage jobs. So what you're seeing on this particular slide, the table shows the median wages for the top 5 highest-paying industries. So you can see these are industries where the median wage is kind of in the mid-30,000s, and on the high end of the 90th percentile, around $50,000 or $60,000. So these are much beyond kind of living wage levels. But when you look in the next column, the number employed, there's a very small number of individuals actually employed in these industries. So 1% or less of those who are actually employed. So where are the bulk of these students going? They're actually in restaurants and other eating places. So the largest industry where we find high school graduates directly after higher education is in restaurants and other eating places. About 24% of the high school grad population moves into this industry with a median wage of just under $12,000. So I think this data was pretty compelling to us, and we've had a variety of requests to break this down on the regional level, because I think this kind of calls out that, while there is this powerful anecdote about opportunities in the workforce, both in the short term and the longer term, that these are not kind of high return opportunities for most of our high school grads only, and there are indeed exceptions, but maybe not the norm. Okay. Now I'm going to shift gears and head into the institution supplement. So this is the survey so we had all 10 of our higher education regions with the action plans, the regional action plans, and then every institution completed this institutional supplement piece. So the first question was around awareness. So we were wondering about the awareness of the regional data. So we asked, are the following stakeholders at your institution knowledgeable about the 60x30 regional data? And so what jumps out initially is that administrative leadership is the most knowledgeable. As you can see, 67% of administrative leaders indicate that they were aware of the regional targets. Another kind of third are somewhat aware, but the vast majority are at least somewhat or very knowledgeable about this. Faculty leadership tended to be more in the somewhat aware category. You can see 51% of faculty leadership. And then with other faculty, even a little bit lower, folks who are falling into the not aware or not sure category there. And then overall, Also a little lower for board members, that only about a quarter, third are very knowledgeable, another third somewhat aware. And then the biggest category of I don't know is also for board members. So we saw this as kind of a group that either the person filling it out or in general the board may not be aware, or that there haven't been direct discussions with the board about this kind of information. We also asked the same question about the regional strategies. And what you'll see here are different stakeholders at your institution knowledgeable about these regional strategies is a similar pattern overall. So the administrative leadership, the vast majority here, 80%, are knowledgeable about the regional strategies, and another 20 to 19% somewhat aware. So similar pattern in terms of faculty leadership, other faculty, and the board, but overall a little bit higher for the strategies. One thing that we talked about in some of the, in the interpretation of this, is that a lot of the regional strategies reflect things that institutions may already be doing. So whether they're very knowledgeable about the regional level of the work, or let's say guided pathways is guided pathways just happening at that institution and then folks are aware of it. So that was the question that we, or a nuance that we realized is a bit obscured in these results, but something that certainly could be possible. So just summarizing what I just talked about, the administrative leadership was most aware in both the strategy and the data areas. And we would recommend thinking about engagement with board members and faculty leadership so that they become more aware of both the strategy and the regional data. And that there was kind of similar levels across both the strategy and the data. Another question we asked on the institutional supplement was to discern kind of the level of engagement in different kinds of regional activities. So we asked if folks, for instance, had joined an advisory group, and we see close to 60% of institutions had participated in their advisory group in some way, or had participated in a meeting. We see that's one of the highest responses. So they participated either in a local meeting or came to one of the regional meetings that the coordinating board hosted. So pretty high levels of engagement there, so happy to see that. 17% had hosted a meeting. Of course, that would be a smaller group, but you can see that a number have done that. But the highest was institutional implementation aligned to their regional strategy. So this is kind of where we started thinking about some of the awareness that regions, this is obviously kind of cyclical and self-fulfilling. What folks identified as a regional strategy were often things they were already working on at institutions and wanting to scale up or broaden or connect to other institutions. And so that institutional implementation is ongoing. And we see, more than 90% of folks working on institutional implementation. I was pleased to see more than 2/3 of folks were using the starter kit for various, for regional data. And we've seen evidence of that in some of the survey responses, but also in external engagement that I've had and seen. Aligning institutional strategic plan to regional data, again, close to 2/3 of institutions were thinking about building either their regional target. I've seen a couple of institutions that have taken the completion targets that they set for their institution, embedded that into their strategic plan, or articulated some of the strategy work within their strategic plan, and then other ways. So the last piece that I'm going to share from the institutional survey is we asked folks about their trends in their own completion targets. So over the last 3 years, are the number of completions increasing, decreasing, or what do you make of what's happening there? This was work led by Luis Martinez, looking at kind of the sentiment of the responses that we received in this area. So some of them expressed kind of a negative perspective, so doubtful that targets could be achieved. Some were sort of neutral, no opinion, and others were positive, that targets could be achieved. And so some examples of what we saw for positive sentiments were, yes, we're pleased to see that the college-wide efforts to improve retention, transfer, and graduation rates are exceeding projected targets. A more neutral response was something like, my knowledge is that we are at 858. So just kind of, these are the facts. And then negative example here would be completion remains high thanks to pathways advising. However, as total enrollment is declining, completion cannot increase much. While the college will remain diligent in our completion efforts, the 2020 target may be unattainable. And so as we look across these, I wanted to provide kind of some summary comments on kind of the general sentiment across the state. And overall, we're really pleased to see that most folks feel positive, that they are either on track or to approach or meet their target for 2020. So 81% positive, about 10% neutral, and 9% expressing concern that they may not be on track to hit their target. And so here's the real reality of it. This table is showing you the completion totals from each of the regions for 2018, the most recent year that we have data right now. And you can see that we're at 341,000. And then in the next column, what you're seeing are the 2020 institutional completion targets. And so these are the targets that you all provided to us, summed up at the regional level. And in the final column, what you're seeing is the percentage difference between where folks are in 2020 and they're getting to their 2020 targets. And so you can see that folks are already at 93% of the way there towards their 2020 targets. And so I think that there's a reason to be positive, that institutions are feeling like they set their targets in reasonable places and that they're seeing the gains that they were expecting. You can see High Plains, for instance, Central Texas, and others are quite close. Obviously, some regions set more or less ambitious targets relative to sort of what we suggested. So some are further along on their way, but overall, I think largely good news here, and as we say, within striking distance of 2020. All right, and as a final thing, I think this is the last slide or second to last slide here. I just wanted to give you an update on what's to come this year. So we're already deep into 2019, 2020, and so some of these are things that have passed and some of these things are yet to come. Most folks over the summer were aware that we did a second round of $5,000 dissemination mini grants. Most regions got one of those. And then, as I talked about, we also did the larger high school to higher ed grant back at the end of August. We received actually a regional equity grant from the Lumina Foundation. It's the Equity Leadership Acceleration Grant, and so it's a relatively small grant, but it's designed to help states. They identified 6 states to enhance equity-minded leadership in higher education. And so we will be, the agency will be leveraging some of these funds to do some internal professional development. And one aspect of this is we're going to actually get some support around data use for driving equity and how we present data and how we talk about data. And so that's coming up for us in the next couple of months. But as a result of that, we're going to be building out some tools for you all at the regional level, which we hope to be sharing with you kind of in the January, February timeline. We're going to really be focused again on that high school to higher ed population, and so as we build out that at a regional level, we'll also be incorporating kind of a deeper focus on equity and how to use this data, strategies that will enhance equity in your region. So the regional target strategy, we're going to be doing check-ins kind of in the next couple of months, so expect to hear from your POC, your staff contact here. We'll do some check-ins with you all, with the advisory groups. So let me be clear, that's at the advisory group level. So if you're on the call as an institutional, somebody who's submitted an institutional supplement survey, we won't be going institution by institution, just at the regional level. Here we are at the regional target update, so talking about the survey responses. And I also wanted to share that we are moving to use Tableau, and the regional workbooks is our very first opportunity to create a Tableau dashboard. We know that people have given us good feedback on the kind of data that we have available in the regional target workbooks, but they are clunky and they are it's administratively time-consuming to produce, so we're looking forward to modernizing and having some better visualizations for you and more user-friendly. So that'll be coming likely more in the January 2020 timeline. We also want to encourage you below the next one, kind of regional stakeholder convening organized locally. We want to encourage you all to be doing at least one local convening this year where you bring together stakeholders, K-12, higher ed, and workforce to continue to kind of monitor and do outreach. So a lot of you have these planned, but we're asking that each region think about at least one opportunity where they would bring a broad group of stakeholders together. Moving down, annually we have our accountability peer group meetings. Those will be probably in April again this year. We'll plan to do the advisory group forum again in June. We got very good feedback on that event, and folks said that they were very interested in doing that again. And then we'll plan to have the annual regional institutional surveys again by August of 2020. So that's the lowdown for the year. And of course, here's my information, here's Louisa's information, and what we will plan to do, I see about 3 questions on getting the slides. We will absolutely make the slides available after this. As I said, we'll also have the webinar recorded, so we'll send out the link and the slides together, so you'll have those. Oh, one last thing. We added, if you recall, we put together a PDF, 1-pager or 2-pager last year on the 60x30TX.com site in the regional starter kits. We put together a summary of your regional strategies, so you would have that kind of 1-pager handy. We're doing something similar this year, and they were just posted today, actually, with a high-level summary of your action plan for this year. So for each region, there's now a PDF version that includes a map of your region and some of the highlights. Not everything you put in the action plan, but key things that you accomplish, key things you have going forward. So take a look at those. I hope those are useful to you to share. And if there are any questions or concerns about that, we're happy to make tweaks or edits if you have any feedback on that. All right, any other questions, comments coming in on the chat? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
It makes his data.
That's right. All right, well, thank you everyone for making time on a Friday to join us. I hope this was useful information. Feel free to follow up with either Louise or myself. Someone said, great job, thank you so much. Happy Friday, and I hope you have a great weekend.